Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null, and once again, I would like to invite you to Conversations with a Remarkable Mind. And our remarkable mind will be here in just a second. And our topic today is going to be a little unusual in that it's going to be asking questions where we may not have all the answers. In fact, we may have millions of answers and only partial connections to the reality. But we have a lot of people who are very certain in this world. They've written books and papers or scientific conferences on where the mind is. What is the mind? We've been told, well, it's in the brain, isn't it? Well, let's see what our guest has to say. And this guest is, to me, like Rupert Sheldrake or McGilchrist, Dean Radin, and someone that I've worked with, Stanley Krippner, Beverly Rubik, and many others. And there is no absolute answer that's going to satisfy everyone's questions. But I believe that we can at least start to come together in fundamental ways and underlying consciousness with respect to artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and material reductionist views about the brain and consciousness. And my understanding is that a lot of this very innovative ideas came after a near-death experience he had about 4 or 5 years ago. That I'm going to find very interesting. So we're going to talk about the hidden war on consciousness, a neuroscientist rebellion against the machine mind. And my guest is Professor Alex Gomez-Marin. And we are talking with him. He is in Spain. So first of all, a little background. He's a Spanish theoretical physicist who became a neuroscientist. And Alex has specialized in the neurobiology of action perception, or how we perceive the world and then immediately act upon it. His current focus has been on what he calls the edges of consciousness. And if I understand his work, he takes into account paranormal phenomena, such as near-death experiences, hypnosis, and the subjective experience of animals, to find new ways of understanding consciousness without falling into the materialistic pathological trap of transhumanism and materialism. For the past 9 years, he has been a professor and the head of the Behavior of Organisms Laboratory at the Institute of Neurosciences in Spain. Alex is a critic of neurocentrism, today's dominant institutional obsession with the brain as an isolated, compartmentalized machine, much like Immanuel Kant would have us believe, that can complement artificial intelligence. As a director at the Perry Center in Tuscany, Italy, Alex is part of a network of leading intellectuals and laypersons that include his close connections to many of the best thinkers in the world today, or at least some of the most challenging thinkers in the world today. I don't think there's a best of anything. And that's why I always, as a competitive athlete, when I finish, I always go over and compliment the competition, because it would be an embarrassment to my spiritual values to say that I beat someone or I'm better than someone. What I did when I compete is I challenge myself, just like Bannister, who broke the 4-minute mile, first person to do it. People said you couldn't do it. Everyone was absolutely certain you could not run faster than 4 minutes. And these were all the experts. Well, when he did it, 3:58, within 2 or 3 weeks, other people had done it. What were they waiting for? They were waiting for someone to show them a door open they weren't aware of. And so Alex is one of those people that is not afraid to challenge the current scientific paradigm by integrating the sciences. He integrates art with the sacred. When was the last time we actually had a candidate for any office that came with the perspective of all life is sacred? We may not act sacred. We may disagree with that. We may be just the opposite. Duality is a part of life. Every action has its reaction always present. It's just our compulsions to exercise restraint and go to a higher level of awareness or not. He holds a PhD in theoretical physics and a master's in biophysics from the University of Barcelona. And last year, an international jury for the popular European OOM magazine listed Alex as among the world's 100 most inspiring people. His center's website is that's P-A-R-I, center.com. Nice to have you with us today. I'm going to begin with a little bit of my own background, just so that if you find any correlations or causation between my experience and yours, it might offer you another opportunity to take us on a journey that we wouldn't be aware of. Is that fair enough? My background, I'm a senior research fellow, head of the anti-aging division of the Institute of Applied Biology, which is like the Pasteur Institute. In fact, the founders were from the Pasteur Institute during World War II and fled to America. And they weren't interested in anything I had to do. They were people who smoked and drank and didn't believe there was a connection between your mind and your body, that they were very materialistic in their thoughts, but they were very brilliant. They were seeking the cures for diseases. I had a different approach. Mine was not a medical approach, mine was a behavioral approach. And to have a behavioral approach, you had to have a belief system. You had to believe in something that was greater than the limitations of a non-belief. And so I successfully completed 176 experiments, and some are landmark. But my most important work they never knew about, because I was told, don't do it. And that was not in nutritional sciences and public health, where I have a doctorate in public health science and human nutrition. And I'm also a registered dietitian. I'm a clinical board-certified nutritionist, et cetera, published a lot of scientific papers. But I believed that there was something more than just being aware of oneself. I believed that there was an intrinsic energy that preceded conception. These are radical thoughts. These were hypotheses. And I was not around anyone who would even accept this as a legitimate conversation. You're born, you live, you go old, you die. And that's it. That's their belief. And nothing you're going to do is except, your genetics are going to determine that, of course. But I decided to do an experiment to see whether or not I had a legitimate belief or not. I took a group of people, 50, who believed that they could help heal people just by energy exchange. So I collected these people, did extensive interviews, and I had the permission of the director of the institute, but no one else. I was told, this is paranormal stuff, outside of normal, and we get our funding from Big Pharma. You start doing something that gets out, we're going to lose our funding. So keep it quiet. Fine, I did. Here's what happened. I didn't use people who were sick. That would come later. I used mice, a ascites tumor. They lived 22 days. I got them through Dr. Sugieriga from the Sloan Kettering Institute. And there were 5 people out of these 50 who were able, within that 22-day period before the animals died, to eliminate the cancers, and they went on to live a normal life. That took a year. Then we redid it because there could have been all forms of extenuating circumstances that could have caused that to have happened. You have to repeat science. You're using the same protocol. Anyone should be able to take your work and duplicate it or come near to it. We did it a second time, then a third, a fourth, and a fifth time, and the results were the same. These individuals, Rabbi Abraham Wiseman, who was known as a rabbi who could help heal, a chiropractor, Dr. Morton Jacobs, who was called the chiropractor with the healing hands. There was the head of nursing at New York University School of Nursing, Dr. Dolores Krieger, Dr. Thomas Kruth, the Order of St. Luke. So all these people had professional backgrounds, and yet that was not a part of the criteria. And all of them had a different reason that they believe caused this to happen. They believe they were a channel through which an energy, and you can fill in the blank, a spiritual energy, came forward. Now, my family is a Native American medicine woman, and she had what was called the gift. It skipped multiple generations, and my mother had the gift. In the South of America, and not South America, but South of the United States, it's called being a sensitive, where you have a clairvoyancy. You know things before they even tell you. You can see the future. You don't tell people this because then they're scared and they think you're a freak. But I was afraid of this because I could see things and they would happen. And I was a kid and I'd had nightmares. But I also knew that I had an energy that could impact people in a positive way. I just kept it quiet. In the South, we call it the praying doctors, where medical doctors, mainly Christian doctors, would do their orthodox therapy, but then they would sit and they would pray with the patient in bed. And that was accepted. Why wouldn't you pray for someone's recovery, right? That wasn't extraordinary. But these doctors had a pretty good success rate. And that's when science was trying to tell us there's no relationship between disease and prayer and living. That's nonsense quackery. In fact, there's a whole group of people called quackbusters who are attacking anyone who associated this. So I asked the director, would it be all right if I publish this, or at least try to? And he said, keep it quiet. I published in the Journal of Psychotronic Research. Here's what happened. Within days of its publication, I was inundated by groups from Italy and Japan, where thousands of medical doctors and scientists who had been studying this, including Stanley Krippner and Dr. Carafe from Drexel University and Douglas Dean from Drexel University. It was only a theory up to that moment. It had never been proven scientifically. This was the first experiment ever done to show that something beyond medicine, beyond science, beyond the scientific materialism, beyond the linear way of approaching all health issues, it showed that something else was involved. And so Dolores Krieger, and there are photographs of all this up on my website, that was 1971. And she said, well, what am I going to do with this now, Gary? I said, why don't you start a class in nursing, since you're the head of nursing at New York University School of Nursing, and call it therapeutic touch. You've heard of therapeutic touch? Yes, no? That's where it began. All right? So I just want to give you a little of my background, but I wasn't allowed to tell the world this, but suddenly I'm invited to go to speak 5,000 and 10,000 scientists and physicians who believed in it, but they had no proof of it. So they didn't want to go public because they'd be criticized. The paranormal suddenly had the legitimacy, and still it was restrained. And yet think of what would happen today if we were open enough at all levels, the sociological level, the psychological level, the behavioral level, or the medical level, to accept that maybe there's something beyond our conscious awareness of our own presence. Maybe there is a light, and I won't go any further into this. I don't want to take your time. So that's just a little bit of my background. But I've used that same principle in all the healing work I've done since. So that is just something to share with you. As I said before, I do a little longer introduction, but at least that. So now I'd like you to begin, if you would please, by presenting a metaphor that perhaps simplistically will present a picture of the problem with the current dominant scientific view of consciousness as a product of the brain. I liken it to scientists trying to observe, study, and measure and quantify a sunrise by facing west. Certainly they can accurately observe correlation. The dark sky turning blue, clouds turning color, perhaps a reflection of the rising sun in a puddle or a pond. But in fact, they don't know anything certain about the sunrise because they aren't looking at it. They're facing west and therefore only witnessing correlations. Then through an act of metaphysical realism, they make the bold statement that the reflections are the sunrise. It seems that by only looking at brain scans to map the activity of thoughts and feelings is like mistaking a puddle's glow for the sun. That may seem overly simplistic, but this is what I believe. And if this is an accurate description of the brain-centric approach to investigating consciousness, then how is this kind of the wrong direction gaze leading all of our theories about consciousness astray? And what needs to change either in scientific theory or philosophical assumptions or in the prejudices within the institutions and academies, so mainstream science can begin, in my opinion, turning east to actually face the real phenomena. The form is yours.
I like that metaphor. I also use metaphors quite often. Well, wonderful to hear you're an explorer of the impossible. I call this thing I'm trying to do a science of the impossible. I'm inspired, of course, by Jeffrey Kripal and also by Carlos Eire. Jeffrey Kripal is a professor of comparative religion, and he's written a few books about the impossible in the humanities, and Carlos Eire has written about the history of actually Catholic super athletes of consciousness. You were talking about athletes of the body, and how some saints were actually reported to levitate and translocate, right? So I borrow from them, from the humanities into the sciences, this idea of the impossible, because even though they say it's impossible, it happens. And it happens to a lot of people. And that's what I've realized in this relatively brief journey. I mean, I've been a scientist for 20 years now. I used to be a physicist. I'm a theoretical physicist by training, then a neurobiologist, and I studied different organisms, fruit flies and worms and mice. Then I realized that studying slices of brains of animals in the lab was not going to reveal so much about human minds in the real world. So I started studying humans in the real world, behavior and cognition, then consciousness. And then I had my own epiphany, you could call it, my own near-death experience 4.5 years ago. And that was the experience that connected my thinking with my heart. Because it's not just that I was thinking about those problems, but I had lived a very remarkable experience. And since then, summarizing my journey, I say I'm doing a science of the impossible. I'm doing science 2.0. You were referring to going beyond science. Maybe we don't need to go beyond science. Maybe we just need to use science as what it actually is. It's a means to investigate the unknown. Unfortunately, science is an activity carried out by human beings in the real world with our own egos and biases and habits. And science, unfortunately, I would say often doesn't dare to study the unknown. Therefore, we speak about the beyond, we speak about something else, but it's all quite here. So a metaphor I like to use is the Lord of the Rings. And again, quite often we behave like hobbits who are so happily living in the Shire, and it's a good life. And then someone comes one day and says, "Hey, do you know that far beyond the mountains there are these weird creatures? You know, they're elves and they're orcs and a great adventure and even humans." I feel like one of those hobbits who's been navigating through these lands, and it's truly remarkable what's out there in terms of human experience and what it tells us about matter and the physical world. So maybe one more thing to say, because I could ramble for a long time, but I'd also like to have your feedback on this. Maybe I'll say two things that are very important for my work. One is another metaphor. I call it the stool of science, to remind everyone, this is very important. Science stands on 3 legs. That's why I speak about the stool of science. We can add a fourth one and talk about the chair of science. Science walks, advances, progresses on theory and data. Of course, we need to collect evidence. That's part of the scientific method. It has its own rules as to how we do it. Data, evidence, we can talk about what evidence is, because evidence sometimes is not evident. You need to interpret it. And that's why there's the other leg, which is theory. And as many great theoreticians have said, without theory, you wouldn't even know what experiment to conduct, let alone interpret it. So it's two things. By the way, sometimes people think that theory is some sort of speculation. They may even dismiss it as just philosophy. Well, philosophy is actually absolutely essential. And if you think about the 1 or 2 or 3 most celebrated scientists of all times, probably they were theoreticians. So 2 legs, data and experiment, of course. But I realized there's a third leg that's often missing, and they don't tell us in school or in university, or the media doesn't speak a lot about it. And it's the socio-political aspect of where these theories and these data are actually constructed and collected and fabricated even. So once you know that science has 3 legs, you realize the 3 amazing, beautiful challenges we have. One is to think the impossible. And the obligation, because it happens. Imagine. So what theories do we have to entertain what's going on during near-death experiences, or children who remember previous lives, or contacts with deceased people maybe, or precognitive dreams? All of these are the edges of consciousness, these foreign lands in the Lord of the Rings. Okay, so the first one is how we think about it. That's the theory. The second one is how we measure the intangible. Because some of those things are rather intangible. And then I say, don't freak out, because science, specifically physics, but all other disciplines, is the art of measuring the invisible, the imponderable. Like all these fields that we didn't know were crossing us all the time, and now we can see them, but we couldn't. And all these weird particles. Everybody believes electrons are real, and of course they are real, but have you ever seen an electron? Well, we haven't really seen an electron. Electrons are like ghosts. We need very complicated theories and technological devices to see them, right? So to recap, 3 legs, 3 challenges. How do we think or imagine the impossible? How do we measure the invisible? And the third one is, how do we talk about those things in a rigorous way and yet open-minded? And this is my third job, because it also can be organized in this stool, right? I'm a theoretician. I'm trying to develop or recover from the past and bring into the future theories, for instance, that allow us to think a brain as a permissive organ rather than a productive organ, right? So how do we do that theory? How do we measure mind and consciousness? And third, how do we speak about it in a respectable way, risking our reputations a little bit? I think we should do that, because for many years these things have been taboo, and there's also an ideological war, and that's why we need to talk about all these isms you were suggesting. Neurocentrism, materialism, literalism, positivism, even atheism. All these isms need to be deactivated so that we can talk in a natural way about what's supernatural, not supernatural, and also talk about what's quite normal. It's not paranormal, or what's rather ordinary. It happens to a lot of people. It's not extraordinary phenomena. They are in a way, but when, at least when I speak about them now as a scientist, and I know what cards I'm playing, Gary, I'm playing the cards of someone who has a PhD in theoretical physics and is a neuroscientist and is a professor. Of course. Now, if I dare to say, yes, I saw 3 beings of light at the end of the tunnel. They were waiting for me. I knew, I had certainty if I would accept their help, I would die. We were communicating telepathically, and I came back, and I was at the hospital room again, which is what happened to me 4.5 years ago. Then, in some strange way, I give lay people, fellow humans, more permission to maybe express their own experiences, and then they feed back, and I can learn from them. So this process is already going on, and at the same time, I want to respectfully address academics who are very, very irritated and opposing anything that kind of challenges their own worldview. So yeah, that would be a first pass for me to put on the table what I think I'm doing. I'm on a journey towards the unknown, and that's what science is about. It's no big deal. It's just that you don't see it so often in just unfolding itself.
Okay, really interesting overview. I would address it by suggesting a lot of your research has been in studying how behavior is freely moving in people, in different species. I have an animal sanctuary. I've rescued about 7,500 animals in my career. Here in Florida, also in Texas, and I give them love and health so they regain a sense of their own life. And I see the interspecies dynamics. I see what happens. My brother, well, we would call him today an animal whisperer. I saw things he did that I've never seen in my life. And I've gone to the Amazon rainforest. I've gone all over the world looking for different truths where I had a theory, just a hypothesis. And as you know, part of the fun of life is not being afraid to share a theory with someone in a civil manner. We used to be able to do that. We can't do it today. You know, so many people are politically weaponized, and especially academics. You mentioned academics. I've been teaching 45 years at the college level. Fairleigh Dickinson University, etc., Pratt Institute, and they're the most difficult people to communicate with. They deal in absolutism, you know, one of the isms you referred to, right? And because they don't want anything to challenge their beliefs, because their meaning of life is maintaining relevance. But there's two deaths. The death is at the end, at least in the physical sense, but you can't destroy. As you know, you can't destroy energy, so it just takes a different form. But where was it at the beginning? That was a whole different subject I had. Well, they believe that when they no longer are considered relevant, they cease to exist. And so they are not open. But you are that dangerous creature who is open. And when you open the door and you're asking people, come take a look in here, and they're going, whoa, 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 no. You know, we have our own doors and we boarded them shut. Well, don't you want to live in the conscious awareness of life? So you're looking, at least from my perspective, and I can be wrong, you're looking at the dynamic of an individual as part of a living dance with the world of our lives. And I think this is what leads into a concept, your concept, and you deserve credit for this, of what you call the edges of consciousness. Those kind of weird borderlands where awareness gets mysterious. So in simple, everyday language, what do you mean by the edges of consciousness for our audience, and this is a worldwide audience, and why should we as ordinary people care about exploring them?
Yes. I use language very deliberately because language is a powerful tool. It's used to reveal and also to conceal. So I try to coin expressions and words, ideas. So, well, two reasons. One is that people remember them, or like metaphors, like the stool of science, or like this image of the Lord of the Rings. And the edges is just a way of saying two things at the same time, which are very important. One, these phenomena, basically consciousness itself, our own experiences, our everyday life experiences, and these experiences that are at the margins, that are weird because they are the margins, they are the edges, and they are frontier of knowledge. They're edgy in that sense. Lord of the Rings is like there's known territory and there's territory to discover. And so they're edges, they're true frontier of the unknown. It's where science, it's a little bit in the penumbra, right? So it's not like big bright light and everything is clear. No, it's confusing, it's the adventure. So it's real cutting edge, not the bullshit cutting edge that we academics are somewhat forced to write in our grants, like, because that's not the cutting edge. That's what they want to hear to give us the money, but it's like true unknown. And they're also edges, and in Spanish the word works very well too, because we say edges is márgenes. And there's this expression to be marginalized in Spanish too, right? So they're edges too, because if you go there, you shall be marginalized in a way by those who don't want to be there. So it has this political connotation too. It's that place where explorers are drawn to. And when we go there, we find other explorers. So we're not that alone, but we are marginalized because we are the margin. So it's in this double sense that I use this word to say, to basically map the territory and know where we are and when we want to go. And within that territory, have another way of talking about those minds. many kinds of minds, and interestingly, they all start with letter A, like my name, because they're animal minds, and I want to say something about animal minds because I studied them for some time. But before we go into non-human animal minds, our own minds can have these anomalous states, anomalous, altered, amplified, if you wish. So there are these anomalous minds that we want to study, these animal minds that we want to study, even these alien minds that may go beyond animals. And we don't need to freak out here. We could talk about plant cognition, the kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, or even fungi, which is the third kingdom. And we could even postulate the fourth queendom, where there are other intelligences, right? So they're animal minds, they're alien minds. Then they're ancestral minds, because where do dead people go when they die if they don't completely disintegrate into nothingness? Well, our ancestors, again with A, and then artificial minds. We could talk about AI. So all of those minds are what you find at those edges. Saying something about animals, when I used to be a theoretical physicist, as I just said, and then I became a neuroethologist, someone who studies the behavior of animals and how their brains regulate it, you could say. And when I studied the fruit fly, I used to dream I was a fruit fly. I think I was doing this abstract exercise of empathizing with the creature to see the world through her eyes, or through its eyes, right? And I did it so strongly that at night I used to dream I was a fruit fly navigating in a gradient of others, and I tried to do the same when I was studying worms and mice. I studied mice, how mice learn to do a task in a very reduced and artificial setting in the lab, and I would wonder what it is like to be that mice. And actually, this is precisely consciousness studies. This is the great challenge we have, because we are the inheritors of Galileo, the great forerunner of science, and Descartes. And they did a very strategic move I would like to briefly explain, because we need to talk about science, but also philosophy of science, sociology, and history of science. So Galileo, 400 years ago, did something amazing. It was a brilliant business move. I describe it as a business move. He said to his religious folks, don't worry, let's make a split. The human soul is for you. I won't touch that. I won't get into trouble. But the material world is for us. And we're going to apply mathematics and measurement and manipulation, 3 M's, mathematics, measurement, and manipulation. And these allowed physicists to truly conquer an understanding and command and control of the physical world. And then came chemistry, and then biology. And the rest is history. Okay, so but the success of science, which is, we cannot deny it, we must celebrate it. Also with its shadows, by the way, because we also invent bombs that can just annihilate entire cities, right? The success of science, 400 years, is based on this move where we decided, our grandfather, Galileo and others, decided to live for later experience. And it's only very recent, people should know, it's only the last 30 years since consciousness studies is an orthodox, sanctioned, non-taboo field of research for scientists. So we have a lot to catch up, because all traditions, that's another reminder, anywhere else in the world, in any other time that it's not these 400 years basically in the West with modern science, they had known all of those edges, all of those impossibles. They have known that they exist and how they work. And we Western modern scientists pretend they don't exist until we validate it. So that's our job now, to do a science that honors the phenomenon. And as also you were saying, some of my colleagues have more fear of being wrong than perhaps of being dead. I think it's because their ego has identified with their own theories. And so that's why it's so hard to change a scientist's mind if he or she has invested decades in a particular worldview. Well, there's this famous phrase that science moves a funeral at a time. It has to do with death, or if it's not that, at least if you have one of those experiences like the one I had, then that in a way shatters your worldview, and then you can put it back together. And then scientists change when things happen to them. Not so much when you give them reasons, which we should give good arguments and good good evidence, which is important, but people change, including scientists, when things happen to them that shatter their worldview. And so we must be patient and move forward.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate those insights. I'm going to tie two things together that directly relate to what you just suggested. At the height of the exposing the myths and misinformation coming out of the scientific and medical community, I think it's a complete misnomer to talk about medical science. I have not seen that. And I was there at the beginning of the holistic movement, the complementary movement. And every one of those doctors was orthodox in their training, their practice, but found it didn't answer the questions, can I actually help in the healing process? Because orthodox medicine went away from the natural healing process and the Hippocratic Oath, which took into account a shaman. You know, and I saw a shaman in the Amazon do some chants, and suddenly, where a kid had been bitten by a poisonous snake, all this venom started to flow out of the arm. There's no explanation within science for how that happened, but there's an easy explanation if you don't limit your truth to the final arbiter of all things real, science, because it's not. And so at the height of COVID, more than 900,000 doctors in the United States accepted everything they were told without challenge. Pharmacists, nurses, physicians, all of our public health agencies, all the media, all the celebrities accepted that this was a pandemic. If you got infected, you've got a big chance of dying. None of that was true. Over 3,000 articles have been written. I wrote at least 40 articles alone that everything they were telling us was wrong, and we've been proven right. That didn't change their minds, but that meant that their mind is not open for change. And almost everything that they're shown, they attack. Back in 1974, one of New York's leading gay physicians, Dr. Stephen Kaeza, and all of his clients were gays. He called me and says, Gary, I'm dealing with a condition, this kind of bowel condition. That's before the word biome had even been coined. And I don't know how to help him. Could you help him? I said, sure. So over the next 10 years, from 1974 to 84, about 800 of these young gay men, and I found that they almost all had the same lifestyle and behavior that contributed to this. It had nothing to do with being gay, because even during the sexual revolution, only about 3% of heterosexuals and 3% of gays participated in it. It's like you would think that everyone was having sex like bunny rabbits. That wasn't true. And but those who did frequently did so with abandonment. Hence, sexually transmitted diseases were common, and hepatitis. And so once I helped them clear up these local phenomena and change their lifestyle, sex was not the problem. Unsafe sex was. And then burning your immune system. If you took an Olympic athlete and you put him on the lifestyle of some of these fast-track individuals, you'd be dead in 2 years. So once we cleared all that up and they were now healthy when AIDS came, I've been treating what had been affect AIDS, but now it had a name. And in the Pasteur Institute and Luc Montagnier, who won the Nobel Prize alone, not with Robert Gallo, he was the one who sent over a virus, LAV virus, and to be tested. Gallo took the virus, called it his own, changed it to HTV3, and he was not held accountable for that. Anyhow, I started the Tri-State Healing Center. I had 22 medical staff, and we never used the medicine, not once in all the years that it existed. And I didn't charge anyone a penny, anyone with AIDS, 2,000 patients. Not one patient died. those who wanted to go on an extensive protocol, coming in 6 days a week for 4 hours with intravenous vitamin C at very high doses, never been done before, 200,000 milligrams, ozone, autohemotherapy, taking blood out, ozonating, putting it back in, drinking juice like bitter melon. Anyhow, they did a holistic protocol. Every single one reversed their AIDS condition, proven by all the lab results. And they sustained that. So we had the first cures in the world for AIDS patients. The African American community knew this because I was on Tony Brown's Journal on PBS and Channel 5, etc. But no mainstream wanted to know it. So we held a press conference. I brought 100 of these people in and said, now, here's their medical records. Their physicians are with them. Here's all their blood labs. So you see viral loads up here going to nothing, HIV positive to nothing. These are completely reversed diseases. Not a single member of the media, the gay community, the AIDS community, not a single member of the scientific community showed up. Yet we had sent out 7,000 invitations on 3 separate occasions, not one. That gets to what Fritz Perl, the father of Gestalt psychology, said, a fear of knowing is a fear of doing. They didn't want to be conscious of this. They didn't want to know what were we doing, because they couldn't patent it and they couldn't duplicate it. So Burroughs Wellcome was selling AZT, which killed over 300,000 people. So they were rewarding the persons who was on the wrong side of this and condemning anyone, myself included, who was actually curing it. Now imagine what that feels like. And I was a friend with Linus Pauling. He was a personal friend, not just a professional friend. He won 2 unshared Nobel Prizes. And they went after him when he said vitamin C at 10,000 milligrams can help people who have cancer. And he lost his reputation. And he said to me, he says, I know what you feel like. You've cured something that they say there's no cure for, and you have the proof of it, and it meets all scientific standards. Well, welcome to the real world of science. And so, on the one hand, I'm seeing that the scientific community was close to this. I'm seeing that where were the doctors who said, hold on a second, are you telling me that a child who has no chance of dying of COVID should be taking a vaccine? Yeah, and taking remdesivir that was shown to have a 54% mortality rate in Africa with Ebola virus, and they've stopped it, and you're giving that to a kid? That's insane. The entire scientific community went insane. The medical community, the pharmaceutical community, all governmental agencies. There had not been a single governmental agent at any agency, not Collins at the U.S. Public Health Service, not Anthony Fauci at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. No one questioned what they were doing. There was no questions allowed. They even started a separate bureau through the Biden administration, the Bureau of Disinformation. And that had algorithms. So if you told the truth, you were persona non grata. You were thrown out. You were condemned. You lost your license. So every doctor who decided to challenge this lost their license or lost their reputation. I defended those people. Now here's the irony. In a normal situation, I would debate them and be on the opposite side. The most cited cardiologist, nephrologist in history had over 1,000 citations. He was very orthodox. He got attacked. Now, mind you, he's this very revered scientist, physician, both. And they destroyed him, excoriated him on the front page of the New York Times. Then suddenly, and going to what you just said, only those doctors who were prestigious, who were called upon, who sat on all the government agency boards, a Yale professor who sat on 7 scientific boards, they were all condemned. Not a single person, not one single person who was using some natural and alternative approaches and telling people not to take the vaccine, no one was spared. It was just a slaughter of the innocents. They suddenly start seeing the benefit of alternative medicine. Suddenly, they start looking at vitamin C drips and vitamin A and vitamin B12, etc. And now that's what they're doing. But no one has gone in to say, we were sorry. You were right and we were wrong. So why don't we all change and calm down? start treating each other with some sense of decency, be open. So to that, you have highlighted the reductionism, which is, to me, a pathology in all fields, medicine, science, education, and especially natural or more holistic medicine is completely avoided in our curriculum. So why is this a limitation from your perspective that's holding back real progress in understanding human life and the nature of the mind?
Yes, wow. And I must say, I believe you're right. And these are difficult things to talk about, even for those of us who study at the edges. The phrase experts say is a freaking abomination. I hate it. I hate it. It has been so misused that I think it has wounded science as an institution so bad that I'm not sure we'll be able to recover it. I mean, of course, science as a method, sorry, and people tend to conflate that. I mean, science as a method is a way of inquiring and knowing about nature, and that's in a way intact. But science as an institution has wounded itself and society so badly by these terrible sins of arrogance and ignorance that I sometimes suspect it's more than ignorance, because some things, when just happened the opposite they should consistently, they point to me more towards evil than ignorance. So I'm with you. And actually, when sometimes people accuse these investigations we do of a pseudoscience, another quite horrible prefix, like supernatural and extraordinary and paranormal of pseudoscience. I think what happens is that there's a dark side of the moon of that, which is scientism. And exactly, it's this idea, not only that science is the best, but the only way to truly know about the world, where there are many other ways to know about the world, like the shamans you were talking about. And even worse, then you use science as a weapon of mass distraction and destruction onto society. It's an abomination. And I've thought about that too. Like, there are different levels. One could be confusion, right? People can be confused. Another one could be conflict. And I try to gently enforce in my own work, and also among my colleagues, their own conflicts, not just confusions, conceptual confusions, but also conflicts and conflicts of interest, even metaphysical conflicts. It's like, wait a minute, you're pushing this narrative, but could it be because you have embraced all those isms we were talking about? Isms that are sometimes like mental parasites, right? And so please, let's be aware of our own and we all have them, but let's not pretend they don't exist. So confusion, conflict, then you scale it up, and then it starts to smell like collusion. I mean, this is not just I'm confused or I didn't disclose my conflicts. It's like I'm colluding because there's a system that selects certain behaviors. And then the fourth one is conspiracy, which, by the way, I don't know if people know, but it's a term invented, weaponizing language again, right, by the CIA, so that when you say it's a conspiracy, you make fun, but precisely they coined it so that you could, in a way, annul the very conversation before it started, because it's a conspiracy, right? So these 4 C's, confusion, conflict, collusion, conspiracy, permeate not only science, but medicine. And I think your terrain is much more dangerous than mine in that sense, because I'm not a medical doctor. I don't work on healing, which, by the way, comes from the word whole, to be whole, as opposed to chop it all in infinite fragments. But I have friends who are medical doctors, and I've seen how they've suffered a cancellation that it's preposterous, just because they wanted to find other ways to help people. So back to the war on consciousness. I think we're fighting a war, and I've told it. I think we should fight it at peace. It's like we should do a war being at peace, and we should put our reputation, whatever, how much we have of it, onto this altar. Offer it. It's good that you remind me and whoever is listening that it's not enough to have many scientific papers or many citations or even be the most published doctor in a field or even be a Nobel laureate. If you touch upon certain forbidden areas, they'll destroy you. So knowing that, let's do it at all scales. I decided I wouldn't wait until I retire to start talking about those things. Why? Because I have 2 daughters and they'll have hopefully also a progeny. So I'm doing this for me, but also for my granddaughters. I don't want them to ask me, what did you do when there was still time to do something in this weird post-truth crazy world? I don't want to tell them, well, I was just trying to keep my job safe. So yes, we could be attacked. But there's another thing I learned, and we didn't speak much about my NDE. I discovered 3 things when I died and came back. One is that I'm mortal. I never really took it seriously. I was 39 years old, and we know we will die, but to experience that, wow, really, I can die at any moment. So I realized I'm mortal. I realized there's something in me, it's rather immortal, and that makes me somehow invincible in a certain way. So when I came back, I said, I'm going to be studying these things and talking. I mean, I've already died once, and so we'll go for it. And the third thing that it taught me is dying and what's beyond, it's a very beautiful place. It is a very beautiful place. We should not be afraid of dying, and we should not be afraid of living. So I hope these kinds of conversations we're having empower people to trust more in themselves and not in what experts say, despite the great irony that I'm invited to podcasts and TV shows and radio because I'm an expert. So I'm using my cards to say, on behalf of my expertise, don't trust my expertise. Just trust your heart and your experiences. The world is crumbling, and we need to restore whatever we can before it's too late.
Well said. I would add to that the irony of consciousness in the real world today is that we want, through our conscious awareness, to make things better for everyone. That we want universal values, where if you are for women's rights, and you should be, then you should be buying a dress made by women working for 24 cents an hour in Bangladesh. So we have to take the material that we live by, that motivates us, that we're indoctrinated into, and understand what Marshall McLuhan, the sociologist and actually behavioralist from Canada, said, that the media is the message, that we are the product. We're just not aware how much of a product and how much people want everything about us, know everything, control everything. So then we're of no value as a human being. We're only of value as a product. But as this system cannot be refined, it cannot be saved. Every effort in the world by everyone throughout history has tried, from Spinoza, Eurydice, Sophocles, Maimonides. They all tried to save the system that they were rejected by. And yet, only when one system is so corrupted by its own hubris, arrogance, and greed and entitlement, when it finally collapses, and sometimes it takes decades, sometimes hundreds of years, what takes its place is what's important. So I see what is taking the place of the absolutism, the scientism that you referred to, the people that guard Wikipedia. So if they say something bad about you and wrong about you, you can't change it. All right. only when Wikipedia ceases to exist, which it should have a long time ago, it's not, in my opinion, a legitimate encyclopedia, where you have someone that you know, their reputation, that if something's wrong, there is a process. You can't do anything. They control it totally. So when one institution begins to collapse, and as you said earlier in the program, you said that it's almost with a crisis that we are forced to change. But then what happens if there's no crisis? What if the crisis is the end point of that process, where your stroke, your heart attack, your cancer, and you're gone at the physical level? So we have to get a different paradigm involved, where our consciousness, we're not at war with, we're embedded together. So we think before we think and act and do and say. We don't allow ourselves to be weaponized in ideology, behavior, or vocabulary. We don't allow our culture's best, whether it's our faith or belief, our behavior, to be taken away from us by young people just in college or out of college who are involved in a whole new cult of polluted consciousness, who are self-righteous and indignant, who believe that they're right. Well, you're 16 years old. What the hell do you know about life? You don't even know how to make your own bed. You're going to tell us that our beliefs are of no value and we have to all change? How does 1% of the population create the dynamic to force everyone else through guilt, shame, or fear to change? All right, that is the battle I see happening. So I don't see saving anything. All right, I don't want to see doctors who do unnecessary surgeries. I did a documentary called Death by Medicine. I wrote an article and a book on it, only using their statistics, no opinion, and they're the #1 cause of death in the United States and have been for decades. And yet they don't change anything. There's never been a meeting each year saying, you know, we just lost another 320,000 people to medical negligence, iatrogenesis, medically induced. Shouldn't we see what we're doing? No. That's why we're still using synthetic hormone replacement therapy in women, 10 million women a year, 13% adverse effect, including breast cancer, ovarian cancer, colorectal cancer, dementia, and now autoimmune diseases. So you're sacrificing 1.3 million women every year for greed and arrogance and control? Yes. I don't want that system to exist. So as one system has lost, we're not fighting that system because they're impervious. They control the media, they control the scientific publications, they control everything. But their own misunderstanding of pure consciousness has caused them to descend into this dynamic, putrid environment. And now we're seeing it. Now the doors are being kicked open. Now the people, not me, but the people are saying, my God, why didn't I find my voice? Why did I think I was staying neutral when I was not neutral? There is no neutral in life. It doesn't exist. Not to do something is a conscious awareness to do nothing. But it's also if you decide with your conscious to do something because your conscious says do something, say something, then you're aware. So we're always in this dynamic. It's just the dynamicism of dualities. If you've been overly conditioned epigenetically and consciously, then you're up against a major battle before you get to the pure consciousness. Consciousness doesn't have to change. It's there. It's been there forever. That enlightenment can't be improved. It's improving our conditioned self to be aware of something that's not in conflict with itself. So anyhow, you're doing a great job. You're causing people to think. And boy, is that the first part of any conversation. What is the likely outcome of my thoughts, my actions, my deeds, and my beliefs? Therefore, we're looking ahead instead of getting to a goal, turning around and saying, oh my God, I just lost everything becoming an expert. I lost my family. I didn't have time for my kids, but I hired experts. Yeah, well, you can't buy love. And a lot of people are looking for happiness in all the wrong places. Consciousness brings you back to the authentic self, that we're all connected. Thank you very much for being with us. And by the way, we didn't even get to a topic. Put it in your schedule, if you would, please, so that you and I can have a conscious awareness talk about artificial intelligence and how it's being embraced, and we're not looking at the downside of this. and there's a whole lot that's going to happen that everyone's going to later say, well, they didn't tell us about that. Yeah, and they're not going to. We will. So if you can find room in that, let's have that conversation.
I've been very comfortable and actually impressed by your background, and so I'd be very happy to come back and talk about the light at the end of the tunnel of this civilizational near-death experience that we seem to be going through right now.
Good. And is the place I gave for people to go? They want to read your work and communicate?
I wouldn't want to delegate it to the algorithm, but I think if they just Google my name, I have lots of science papers, I've been in lots of podcasts, I just published my first book in Spanish. So just type my name and see what you find. Let the synchronicities guide you.
Good. Just put in Dr. Alex Gomez, Gomez -Marin, Marin.
Correct.
Thank you, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you, Gary, very much.
And thank all of you for listening and watching this. And if you believe that anything we shared has meaning and purpose, then please share it with other people. Have a nice day.